They say to look for sanity in an insane society is madness. And given that Nigeria is very far from a sane society, I thought the best way to navigate Nigeria is by moving mad. And what better way to move mad than give people completely bad and terrible advice? At least that was my thought process initially before I started this episode. Welcome back, guys. This is Madness in Nigeria Living, and I'm your host, Gisi. The whole idea of this podcast generally is me stating my viewpoint on things, making a little bit of research here and there, but ultimately my own individual opinion and bias comes to light, and today is no different. That said, let's jump into it. I feel there's a lot of benefits that go into giving a completely bad advice. Now, what am I calling a bad advice? Bad here is an advice, if taken face value for the words it is, means something that will not be good for you. So, with that definition out of the way, let's examine it. I know a lot of people have experienced a situation wherein you know someone is giving you an advice, the advice is good, but you can't help but feel like the advice is bad for you. That's something I might discuss later on, but for now I just want to discuss on the brilliance of giving completely bad advice. Unfortunately, for the vast majority of my friends and my life, people come and meet me for advice. I've also had a few situations where complete strangers come and meet me for advice. I don't know, maybe I'm cute, like give cute advice type of face. I don't really know. I don't really think much about it. But because I give so much advice, I started thinking of ways I could have given advice that would be more effective. And something I noticed was, the more my intention is good, the more I want to give good advice, the more the people are less likely to listen to my advice. In that thought process, I came to the realization bad advice is the way. Now, I was in a public space and there were two guys having a conversation I find very fascinating. So much so that my facial expression was not hidden. They knew I was listening to them. One of the guys here was asking about like how to spend money if they have started thinking of growing a family in this current economy. And the other guy gave him the best bad advice I've ever heard. What he said was this. He said the quickest way to build a house, to get money to build a house, is not by renting, but by staying in hotels. Now think about it. If you are staying in the hotel, you won't spend money on rent, you won't spend money paying NEPA bills, you won't spend money on furniture. Everything is available. All you need is money for food, and you sleep and you wake up. I was like, wow. At first, I started doing the calculation of, as stupid as that thing is, if you do the calculation, I think a month or 2 months worth of staying in the hotel every day will cover the average rent for someone starting up. But then I was like, pause. This advice is genius, because the other guy was advising in that moment started seeing the benefit of, okay, maybe I should cut down on me going to a hotel, me going for flexing and all that. I was like, interesting. Why did that completely terrible advice give the optimal thought process to the first guy? That's when I started thinking about it. There's something here that comes with giving good advice. When you have good intent for someone, for example, let's say a student that is looking up to you, maybe you are their guardian, you are their friend, and they come to meet you. Oh, where can I get motivation to be better at this particular subject or to improve my academics? And you go, and maybe you should read more books, take more time, read way before the calendar comes. You want to go for tutorials, sound advice. But the problem is, when you give that advice, there's something that happens. One, you cannot really inherently know their internal motivation. You don't know what their internal emotional environment is. So you can only give based on yours. And when you are giving the advice based on yours, more likely than not, they will feel like they are a failure or an inferior to you. So for people that I give a lot of advice, they think I have my whole life figured out. Why? Because they can see the advice and they don't know my internal environment. So they just assume since I can give that sound advice, I have everything figured out. And because of that, people who listen to advice are less likely to follow the advice because inherently they'll feel like they are fed. And that's why it was very fascinating to see. One research showed that the best way to motivate people to do what they want to do is to get them to give you advice instead. If you know what the person wants for themselves, they come for advice, find a way to change the conversation. Later on, ask them for an advice on that particular subject. They are more likely to be motivated because them giving you the advice and them thinking it through will give them confidence. Back to you giving good advice. When you give them and they inherently lack the confidence because they feel you have your own thing figured out, at first they will try because they want to prove a point. But the moment of them trying and them struggling, once they start struggling, they'll start feeling like, maybe I'm not good enough. Or they might not inherently think this way, but they will just struggle and it will be difficult for them to go through with it. If that's the case, why do I say giving the bad advice will work instead? That's the beauty of bad advice. See, when you give someone a good advice here, they stop thinking in context of who is giving the advice. They start thinking in the context of how to achieve the advice. And because of that, they will not put into consideration their own idiosyncrasies, their own quirks, those tiny things that make them, that would affect the way they can follow the plan of their advice. And that's the beautiful brilliance of bad advice. If you give someone a truly terrible bad advice, the first thing that comes to their mind is, why? Why are you giving me something that is obviously bad? And they pause to think. Now, they have taken the advice and put it in context. They are now forced to think of different angles to look at the advice. They also think in the context of the person giving the advice is the person having ill intent, which in turn shows ways they can navigate their relationship with that person. You see, the brilliance of bad advice. Now, thinking in context here, you are forced to think of creative ways to look at that same problem. For one, the urgency pauses because you are now able to reevaluate multiple alternatives. Because one of the biggest problems with advice is when you ask someone to give you advice, they have limited information. They can only give you advice based on what you are telling them. And even if they want to include other information, they are forced to assume and impose. And more so than that, they also would impose their belief system. It's inherent. They will impose their belief system inherently on the advice. And that means, even if it might be a good advice for them, it might not necessarily be a good advice for you. And when you don't think in this context, someone can give you sound advice and it will be terrible for you. That's the brilliance of bad advice. Bad advice would always be bad advice. And because of that, you are forced to think of these things, which in turn makes you find creative alternatives. That's one brilliance of bad advice. Bad advice will give you creative alternatives. And that is why I am pro bad advice. I actually believe what I'm saying, although it might seem like I'm joking. I actually believe what I'm saying. I'm pro bad advice. Bad advice gives you creative alternatives. Let's look at a good advice now. For some people who don't know, I'm not a believer, I'm not a Christian. And one advice my mom always gave me is to give my life to Christ. See, that's a good advice. If I don't think in the context of why is she giving me this advice, I am more likely to either be reactionary and dismiss it or just accept it, both of which does not work for me and my belief system. But when I pause to think, okay, why is she giving me this advice? In what context? She sees that I'm not in my best place. She sees that these things are happening to me. So she gives me God because she believes God will provide those things. Now, I see the advice as, one, she's showing care. And two, she's showing care in the only way she knows how to. So in turn, it makes my conversation with her easier. It makes us bond better, which is beneficial to me and beneficial to her. But also, it makes me think of ways to achieve what I want to achieve without God. And that is the whole point of the advice to begin with. It's not the concept of God. Now, if you think this ways, you can really have advice from any type of person. Some people will feel like, oh, you're not supposed to have advice from certain type of people. Some of the best advice I've had were from truly terrible people. I've had advice from every type of people, from police, even as far to a police advising someone to start doing crime so that they will have their own benefit. Those are the kind of things. You see that the message is inherently packaged in layers of other things. And with those layers, their individual viewpoint, their individual beliefs comes in. Being able to always remember to strip away the layer, bring it to the core, and understand the core, and use that core to work for you, is where good advice fails. And it's not a problem with good advice, it's a problem with the way our brain works. If we feel our viewpoint is already aligned, our belief is already aligned, we are less likely to look at the nuances. We are more likely to see it as good versus bad. But with truly bad advice, we are now forced to look at the nuances. The first thing is, the person giving the advice, does the person mean well for me? And if you concluded that the person mean well for you, you are now more likely to find ways you can apply that advice to you. And that's why bad advice, to all my friends watching this is all the caveat I'm giving you. Once you come on, it's bad advice. Yes, because the bad advice will help you on the long run. That's the philosophy. Now see, there's this conversation I had some years back, more than 10, I think by now I should be going to like 14 years now. I was having a conversation with my friend, and he bought pink lips cream. And I was like, why? Why not just tattoo your lips pink? Because tattooing your lips pink is just easier, better, and you don't have to keep on buying the cream. To that, my friend, that's a completely bad advice. But he said something which makes that bad advice a good advice to him on the long run. He said, but if I tattoo my lips pink and black lips start to trend now, I want to get my black lips back. I was like, fair. See the thing. From that advice here, he saw that, he's inherently buying the pink lip cream because it's what's trending. Not because that's what he necessarily wants long term. And because that's what he wants for the now, he's going to make decisions for the now. Me, on the other hand, I thought, okay, let me give you advice that will be better for you on the long run. See, even though my advice had good intent, the advice inherently failed to communicate that, and he picked it up by looking at the nuances. If I had gone full-blown bad advice from the beginning, I think a lot of people would just pick all these nuances up themselves. It makes the other person, and I've repeated it over and over again, find creative ways, creative alternatives to the problem. That's why bad advice is the way to go. Now see, there's a reason when parents advise their children is less likely to take the advice. It's not because the advice coming from the parents is not sound. It's not because the advice is not good. It's because when the advice is good and you know the intent is good, the nuances get lost. You think of how to achieve the advice, and most times, more likely than not, you start seeing your limitations because it cannot fully apply to you. But when you have been given a truly bad advice, you're forced to think. You're forced to find ways to make it apply to you. And for me, I think since I'm someone that I don't believe a lot of things that the vast majority of my society and family believes in, most of their advice comes off as bad advice to me. But in doing that, I've been able to get sound, valuable advice from these people. Yes, I'm saying it on camera. I consider your religious advice bad advice. But the point is, because I can see the nuances and I can understand that you are not coming for me, I can understand you are telling me what you believe in, I focus more on the core message. You are telling me to be better, and I will be better. Oh God, I'm just really having fun with this. I'm really having fun with this. This is a stupid episode, but I'm having fun with it. Now, another benefit with being told bad advice here is it forces you to look at who is giving you the advice. You now understand their struggles, you understand their experiences, their reality that made them think that's the only way to go. See, if you are a woman here, you are about to get married or you're already married, and your husband is cheating on you, your husband is even beating you, and maybe your aunt, your mom, or some elderly woman is giving you advice, oh, just stay in the marriage, oh, this, that. That's a bad advice. But in understanding that advice, you cannot see that they think this is the best way to go because that's all they have known. You cannot empathize with them. You can see their struggle. You are going to ignore that advice, of course, but you cannot better bond with them. You can help them see, or if you don't want to help them, you can just be there for them as a human. That's the benefit bad advice can give. Bad advice can make us as a collective live in harmony. Bad advice can... It's difficult to say this thing seriously. Bad advice can make us as a collective here live in harmony. It can connect us because we are better able to empathize with others when we see their history, we see their experiences, not because they are telling it to us, but because they are telling us what they believe in, and we can see how their experiences has shaped the kind of advice they can give. Good advice is good in an ideal world, but since we live far from an ideal world, it's very important to give bad advice because these are the benefits of bad advice. God, I laughed too much in this episode. These are the benefits of bad advice, and this right here is what I'm telling you, I'm preaching to you, one might say, to go ye into the world and give bad advice, because in doing so, you will help the people you truly care about. Okay, and one last thing, if you really want to give advice to people, try as much as possible to not give advice based on what your ideal self will do. Give advice on what you believe their humanity can do, one. And even if you want to give advice based on what you can do, also make it known to them that I'm giving you this advice because this is what I will do. If you want to ask someone for advice, it's better you ask the people to give advice on what they would do, not what you should do. Because in doing so, their biases is more upfront. You cannot pick what works for you. This is just the caveat. And one last thing here. Instead of asking for advice, if you see that you are lacking confidence for something, find someone you can mentor instead. It gives you the confidence. So that's just caveat. That said, that's all we have for today's episode. Thanks again for coming. I love that you guys have been supporting me. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Comment down below what's your favorite bad advice you have ever had. And see you again next week. Bye. Bad advice. I like this episode. I think this is personally my favorite episode because the idea just came to me as a joke, and the more I joked about it, the more it started making sense. Or maybe I was just looking for meaning, but that's it. Welcome back, guys. This is Madness in Nigeria. Living.